go ahead and start off the meeting. I'd like to introduce you to the leadership team, Brandy Beals. We have Patrick, Josh, and myself, Olga. And our mission here is to bring us all together to talk about Tableau, the roadmap for Tableau, any new products. We like to talk about use cases. One of the favorite things that we do, or that we like to do, is to have some of our members go ahead and present. So a customer use case, it's great. You know, we know the software is great and we can do fun things in it, but to hear the other parts of using Tableau, the parts about how do I convince someone to move from their spreadsheets to data visualization tool, or how do I talk about data governance in here. So some of the challenges that happen in real life, we love to hear how people have succeeded with the different use cases. So if you are using Tableau, if you're just starting off, if you've used it for a while, if there's any story that you want to tell that you could bring to us, we'd love to have you present. Another favorite thing that we do is to have tips and tricks, speakers about talking about tips and tricks. We actually have that today. And we're here also for support, for advice on issues, kind of like the Tableau doctor does, and then just getting to know each other and having a lot of fun. That is absolutely my favorite part. So we'd like to go ahead and get to know everyone that's on the call in a special way. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's go over the agenda. We're gonna do an audience profile. So we're gonna take some polls and find out who we all are based on some questions. We'll then have a lightning round of Tableau tips and tricks. So we have a special guest who will walk us through that quickly. And then we're gonna do a recap. So Brandy is going to give us some highlights from TC21. I'm not sure how many of you were able to see it. I do know that there are recordings now that we're able to see. I didn't see enough. I definitely have to go to the recordings. And then we have gifts and the wrap up. So I will now give it away to Brandy, and let's get to know each other.
Awesome. Thanks, Olga. I did just notice that this says, if you want to be entered to win a giveaway, right, use the Q&A panel. I'm a big fat liar. We don't have a Q&A panel in this meeting, so you're going to use that chat window instead. So just keep that in mind. But as Olga said, we do like to do an audience profile, which is basically just getting to know you guys a little bit more. And if you've been to any of our meetings, you know that we love doing this. So what you can do is you can open up your phone and scan this QR code. The easiest way I found to do that is actually to open up your camera if you have a smartphone, and then usually your smartphone camera will actually say, click here to open up this link. You can do that. Or if you don't want to type out this fantastic URL, I just dropped it in the chat window. So you can click that and open it up. And in just a second, we're going to go through some awesome, fun questions that we have for you. So we'll switch over, same QR code and same URL here, but I'm going to give everybody just a second to get that signed in and up on your screen. So, all right, so I've now started the kind of polling, which means that the first question should show up on your screen. And the question is, which Tableau conference event is your favorite? There are lots to choose from, for sure, but some people, right, just really love that opening keynote. Some love the Iron Biz, Devs on Stage is another one. If you choose something else, please throw in the chat what that something else is. What conference event did I not cover here and what one is your favorite. And then for those who just said NA, I'm assuming that means, you didn't attend the conference. And so you don't have a fun one. Always love the speed tipping sessions. Well, Patty, you're in the right place. Yes, making it better. That was a really good session I heard as well. I did not attend that one, but I'm glad that you liked it. Yeah, I mean, the individual sessions are absolutely fantastic, right? They have just amazing content out there. And Ray said brain dates are awesome too. 100%. I love brain dates. Great. Well, thank you guys so much. Iron Viz is definitely a fan favorite. It's pretty cool, right? People love to see real demonstrations. Okay. So the next question is, how do you feel about meeting in person? So this is a question that I'm sure all sorts of Tableau user groups have gotten lately. So we would love to know what your stance is on it. Let's use data to drive this decision. It'd be wrong not to.
Data and science, yes.
All right, so this is wonderful. I think if you saw the chat window, right, we have people dialing in from all over. So it makes it really hard for people who are maybe outside of any major metropolitan area to attend meetings. And then now too, in your virtual, right, you can attend a meeting anywhere.
Yeah.
And so your options are just greater and you can kind of pick and choose. So fantastic. Yeah. Option for hybrid. That would have been good, Jen. Good suggestion. We just need to figure it out, right? If you've been to one of our meetings before, you know that we actually like to move our meeting around to different locations around Milwaukee so that we do kind of, I don't know, maybe you get to see other companies, what their facilities look like. It's kind of fun. And then maybe, we're kind of closer to you and it's easier for you to get to the meeting. But one thing that we've been contending with is the fact that a lot of organizations don't want random strangers coming into their buildings right now. So definitely just something to consider, but thank you so much for answering this question. Okay, the next question, this is quite the list. Which Tableau products do you use? And this is you can select multiple ones. So I just kind of want to get a sense for the products that you use. There are a lot, Tableau is adding more all the time, right? Tableau Desktop is kind of, you can't really use Tableau without Tableau Desktop. It's the creator of everything. And then Tableau Server and Tableau Online are very similar products. You likely only have one or the other, but I'm sure that there are some organizations that have both. But this is like, this creates the UI that users can access through a web browser, right? And then Tableau Prep is your data preparation tool. The two add-ons are like, you pay extra for those and they help you with like data catalog, data lineage, things like that. The server management one just helps you like analyze the performance of your query. So if you're a Tableau server admin, that's probably a really great product for you, but likely I think a lot of people are using these other tools. And then I didn't want to fail to mention some of the Salesforce products that we're starting to see come through the Tableau ecosystem as well. But it doesn't appear anybody uses them. So.
Good to see Prep making a comeback, or not a comeback, but making a large splash out here, because I know that's one that's been pushed for quite a while. So that's good.
That's true. Yeah, I think, there's always that, it takes a while for a product to really come in.
Yeah, the CRM and the Einstein discovery pieces as it merges closer with Salesforce will be really interesting to see how that goes. So we'll be really interested to see anyone out there's feedback as they start to use those.
Exactly. Is CRM Salesforce? Great question. No problem for not knowing. I don't really know. I feel like Tableau CRM is like what Einstein Analytics was. That's actually what it is. So no, Tableau CRM is not Salesforce. So you can have just Salesforce and not use Tableau, and you can use Tableau and not use like Salesforce products. Tableau CRM is Einstein Analytics. So it's like their predictive engine. I believe it creates models. It's more on the Salesforce side, is my understanding. Einstein Discovery, I wish I knew more, but my understanding is like Einstein Discovery is more within Tableau, utilizing that model that was built within Salesforce. But you definitely need to have Salesforce in order to use those two products. What's the difference between Tableau and Online and Tableau Public? Great question. Tableau Online is usually for an enterprise. Tableau Public is open to the public, but and there's a lot more features with Tableau Online, like the ability to like refresh your data source on a schedule. It's basically Tableau Server, but like Tableau's SaaS product. So it's
Yeah, it's their
software as a
SaaS
service.
offering.
Tableau manages and maintains Tableau Server for you. They call it Tableau Online. Tableau Public is like a lightweight version that removes a lot of those enterprise features and literally is just like a LinkedIn portfolio of sorts. Is like what Tableau Public is. That's like my perspective, I guess. All opinions are my own, just to be clear. Okay, so yeah, and you know, great question about references on good examples of getting Tableau and Salesforce to play together. It's a great question. I think that's why we wanted to understand what products you use, because now we can better tailor content from the Tableau user group related to the products that you're actually using. But I personally don't have any references for you. I'm sorry. Okay, so next question. These are really, really telling questions. These are wonderful. So thank you so much for participating. This question, very simple binary question. Do you use Slack? Yes or no? Guessing a lot of people are using like Teams, something like that. I'm a big fan of Slack. And now that Slack, oh good, Wendy, I'm glad you were hoping for this question. You know, Slack, if you don't know, Salesforce purchased Slack, so it's kind of part of that system. And there are quite a lot of efforts going on right now to integrate Tableau and Salesforce into the Slack application. So just kind of curious, you need a tutorial for sure. Maybe a topic for a future meeting. I love that idea, Tammy. Let's do that. Yeah, Slack for things other than work. If you don't know, the Wisconsin Tableau user group, which includes Madison and Milwaukee, we have a Slack workspace where we continue to share content and events and things like that. I'm sharing the link in the channel or in the chat on like what that link is. If you don't already have access, you will need to sign up. And the second link, which is Garbledygook, is how you can sign up for it. Okay. And special tip for Tammy, when you sign up for it, or you go to the general channel within Slack, at the top of the channel, I've actually bookmarked some links on like quick start guides and how to get started with Slack, because you and me both. It can be overwhelming. So anyway, check those resources out. Okay. So I feel like I'm going on a monologue with these questions, but they're really, really great conversation starters. So the next question is, what are your professional goals? And I wanted to maybe say for 2022, but I feel like just generally, what are your goals? So is it building up your network? You can select all that apply here. Maybe it's getting a certification or completing a course or reading a data book or something like that. And if it's something else, I'm going to ask that you throw it in the channel. And it's totally okay to not have goals too, just to be clear. Sometimes we need that mental, we need to remove that pressure from ourselves. You don't have to feel like you have goals. It's totally fine. Just feel like, I'm really just looking on watching everything on Netflix related to Britney Spears. That's cool too. Yes, building dashboards with personal data for sure. I love that. Data viz challenges. Yeah, there's lots of awesome stuff that the community has. So I love that. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for answering this question. Again, you know, we want to help facilitate this for you too. So if you need that motivation to get certified, maybe we'll do a certification study group or something. So we'd love to hear anything that you'd like to see from us. You need to tell us what we need to be doing for you, by the way. Otherwise, we're just going to make stuff up. So that's really the point of the question. Okay, so next question though is would you, so I always like to throw in a random one. So I feel like this is also very telling. Would you rather always be slightly late or super early? Like which camp do you fall into? I'm a slightly late gal, I'll say.
Say this is anonymous, so you can be truthful.
Yes, this isn't, yeah, no judgment, no judgment. I mean, you guys are judging me probably.
I'm in the slightly late camp too.
Me too. Live your truth, everyone.
I prefer to be early, but I end up slightly late 100%. Yeah. And that's the thing, you get one meeting where you're late and now, you know, you're off for the rest
Snowball.
of the day. So,
Yeah, snowball.
For sure.
Yeah.
Virtual does help with that. Click on.
Oh, I was in the office yesterday and I wasn't used to how long it took me to walk somewhere to get to a meeting. So for sure was slightly late yesterday. All right. Fantastic. This is our last question, this marathon Q&A here. So what would you like to see from us next year, right? We're already thinking about 2022 and we want to give you what you want. So you can select all that apply. We want to hear, you know, what you're looking for from us. So is it demos, use cases, best practices? You want to hear about new products like Einstein Discovery and, you know, data catalog or something. Tableau Doctor is where you bring the questions and we as a community help answer them. So definitely give us some feedback. We welcome feedback. If you said something else, please, again, throw it in the chat, what you're looking for. Some people are like, I love tips and tricks for different skill levels, for sure. So that's a great one. I love that nobody select NA. Like some people are like, no, I have nothing to add here. So this is fantastic. Appreciate the feedback. All right. Well, that concludes our audience profile and our Q&A. Hands-on workshop or something. That's a great suggestion, Tammy. Thank you. But that concludes our audience profile. Thank you so much for participating and giving us that feedback we really want. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Olga.
Okay. So we have a awesome guest today. Her name is Erin Waldron. And so it's going to be a pretty quick talk, but if you want to ask questions that maybe Erin can answer afterwards, or one of us can answer during her talk, go ahead and ask questions, but using the Q&A feature.
Sorry, Olga, the Q&A feature is disabled for this.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Let's just use the chat feature. So
we'll try to keep track of the questions.
Each other and ask questions here and participate. So we want to give away some cool swag prizes later on, and we'll keep track of who is participating. How's that in our chat here? So let's get back to Erin. So Erin is going to do what we all have said our favorite thing is tips and tricks with Tableau speed tipping. So Erin has a company called Data Dozen, visual analytics, training, project consulting. And one of my favorite things that I found is she is making data approachable, exciting, and meaningful, which I thought that was awesome. So Erin, go ahead.
Sounds good. Well, hello, everyone. It's one of the silver linings of sort of our virtual setup right now is just being able to connect with other user groups. I am out of Kansas City and one of the leaders for our steering group here for our local tug, but it's really exciting to get to connect with another Midwestern Tableau user group, because I feel like we're so much of, Tableau is anchored on the coast, and sometimes I feel like we're kind of in that flyover world. So I at least am thrilled to be connecting with you guys in Milwaukee. So if you don't mind, I will go ahead and share my screen. Now, when I do this, I will lose the ability to see what's happening in the chat. So one of the great things is, I can hear you. So interrupt me if questions come up or if something's not showing. I really don't mind at all. So what we're going to do today is speed tipping. I always love attending speed tipping, and I thought it would be a really fun challenge to try to build a speed tipping session. I originally created this for our user group in Kansas City and had so much fun with it that I thought this would be a really fun thing to get to share with other folks who might be interested. So the goal today is 60 tips in 30 minutes. Now, I tend to be a little bit of a neat freak. And so my goal here is to sort of split our 60 tips into 15 in 4 sections. And I will not start that 30-minute timer until I'm through this little preamble, because we're going to be right up against it. But here's kind of a roadmap of where we're going with these tips. So we'll have organized data, tidy workbooks, beautiful visualizations, and flexible dashboards. And what you'll see is the tips kind of cluster around a couple topics. We've got data source, data pane, and calculated fields. Under tidy workbooks, we'll talk about the menu bar, the workspace itself, and different exporting strategies. With the beautiful visualizations, we'll look at some fun building shortcuts. We'll talk about labels and tooltips, which I think get kind of overlooked sometimes. They're fun to dive into. And then with our flexible dashboards, we'll talk about the dashboard size, how we actually make sure what we're building will look good on someone else's laptop or desktop. We'll talk about containers and the layout tab there as well. My hope is that with these 60 tips, you find something that is new for you, whether you've been using the tool for many, many years, like some of us, or whether you're just getting started. I definitely tried to throw in things that I wish someone had shown me right at the beginning. So if you're in your first couple months with the tool, I'm hoping you'll find some things that'll really speed you up and make the tool a little more approachable, demystify it a little bit, because Tableau is so powerful, but gosh, you get in there the first time and it can be a little overwhelming. So with that, before we dive in, I also want to show you the data source, just so you have a sense of kind of what we're talking about here. So behind the scenes, we've got sort of 2 components to this data source. The first one is GDP by country. So we've got 217 countries going for 49 years, 1970 to 2018. And this comes from the World Bank. And we're marrying that with some life satisfaction data. This was inspired by a Makeover Monday data set I saw a little while back. So we've got some countries, not all 217, much shorter time frame from 2005 to 2018, and this is coming from the Gallup Happiness Center. So the data kind of looks like this. If we take a little snapshot from the US, you've got your region, your name of your country, the income group, year, the population, GDP, and then this is our life satisfaction. You can see here for the United States, it actually starts in 2006, not 2005. So we'll see areas where we've got null values where there's not that life satisfaction data. And I kind of love to look at this, all these 7s. I don't know if anyone else ever works quite a bit with survey data, but in the survey world, sometimes when you're asking people, 0 to 10 or 1 to 10, pick such and such, how do you feel about blank? Often we'll say, but you can't use 7 because we gravitate as humans to that so intensely. And it's funny to see that as a nation, we are also doing that with our broader happiness. So you don't have to take notes. Sit back, relax. I'm hoping that you're able to sort of enjoy this and not feel the pressure to write everything down. In order to prepare to do this, I had to make a cheat sheet anyway. So I've got a full cheat sheet on my website with every tip that I will attempt to get across in 30 minutes, maybe with an explanation that might be a little clearer than what comes across in the moment. So we've got this pocket guide for you. I've got the Tableau workbook that you'll also see me work through during the demo. That's on the website as well. And this is being recorded, and weird silver lining. So if you're interested in those things, I will go ahead and drop this in the chat real quickly. You can find the cheat sheet there. I once was in biology class. I remember this so vividly as a junior in high school, and the teacher said, you're not allowed to take notes, just be present and pay attention, and the notes will all be there for you afterwards. And never before have, a room of 17-year-olds wanted to take notes so badly when they're not allowed to. So you're welcome to take notes if that's your way of learning, but I want to make sure that you know that this PDF has everything that we're working through today, so there's no pressure. You're not going to lose anything. So with that, I'm going to jump on over to the workbook. Can someone, maybe Brandy or Olga, can you give me a quick sanity check that you are indeed seeing a Tableau workbook?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, with that, let me grab the handy dandy timer here. So 30 minutes starting now. All right, let's dive in with organized data. So I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about this data source pane to get started. There's two things I want to point out here that you may not know about. So one is this toggle right here that's between live and an extract. When we connect to a native data source, almost always it's live, but this extract can be really helpful, especially for drafting. So if you are connecting to a really tiny Excel spreadsheet that lives on your computer, this live connection is not a problem. As you're building and dragging and dropping, you got a small data set, those queries are firing off and you're not noticing any lag. But if you're working with a bigger data set that's sitting on a server somewhere, and you want to have a local copy to make drafting easier, this extract can be a helpful toggle, even if later you plan to re-enable that live connection. I'll also point out this data source filter. So we're all used to taking filters, on using our filters card on a worksheet and filtering down to different variables. But you can actually introduce a filter at the very beginning before you even bring your data set into Tableau. And this data source filter, you can just click that add button, click and add here. Let's say even though you're connecting to a huge data source, so you're only going to work with like North America or Latin America, you can go ahead and add that filter here. If I click this and I say, okay, then when I bring this data source in from the get-go, everything will only be in North America. All right, let's hop into our workbook. Let's talk about this data pane. This is where all the magic is. If you're new to Tableau, what you're recognizing hopefully is that all your columns have been turned into these variables. Tableau has taken its best guess for what the variable's data type is, but you can change these. So if you are new to Tableau and wondering, gosh, this is actually a number, not a string, or vice versa, just click the icon. This can be really helpful for changing, especially geographic information. If you have something that's actually a zip code or a state or a province and it's being mistaken for a county or something like that, you can adjust those there. I love to go ahead and organize my data pane by folders. Again, that neat freak in me loves to change this from this group by data source, which is the default when you load a new data source, to group by folder. Then what I like to do is make my folders, and I'll keep out the variables that tend to be the workhorses of what I'm building and put everything else that I use less frequently into one of these folders. Keep in mind too, you got the search bar up here. As your data sources get bigger and bigger, for example, for looking for GDP, you can always use your search function there and pull up the variables that match. Another thing I'll point out is when you right click any of these behind the carrots, if you're new to Tableau, that's where all the good juicy stuff is under those little carrots. So you right click these little drop down menus here. You do have the default properties. I love to point these out. You can go ahead and set, for example, the aggregation or the number format for your variables. Do that up front with your data pane. And then every time you pull those variables into a worksheet, you don't have to say, hey, this is actually currency. Oh, that's actually a percentage. You can also, I don't know that this is even part of it, but bonus tip, you can also add a comment to the variable itself. So if I say hello world, this will actually give you a little hover over box, a little tooltip actually on top of the variable. Great place to add a little metadata if you need that for your group. You'll notice hierarchies here. You can create where you can actually nest and say, hey, with region, there's always the country underneath, and establish those hierarchies in your data pane. And the biggest thing that I always want to point out is really this count, or in older versions, number of records. So the big highlight when I'm setting up a data pane and I've connected to a data source, the big thing I want to make sure I do is make sure all the data actually came into my workbook. So I'm a big fan of the sort of have a hypothesis and then test it. So whether it's called count or number of records, if you're in an older version of Tableau, you want to bring this out. I love to go ahead and make a little chart of this. So if I bring out the count, I should see how many rows, how many records are actually part of this data set. Now this makes sense. So I've got hypothesis. I should have one row for those 217 countries by 49 years. And if I multiply that, this is what I should get. The other thing I like to do sometimes is just go ahead and build that out. So you can make spreadsheets, but you can also make visualizations with your number of records. So if I pull out the country name and look through, yes, indeed, I'm seeing 49 records for each. I can bring out that year as well. And what I see, I'm going to go ahead and pull this. The zoom bar is always right where you don't want it to be. Go ahead and pull the year out as well. I'm seeing 111. To just double check this, I might take this count onto color, take a look at the entire view. I can see that every single record here is 1. So I know, I understand what the granularity of the data set is. Bonus tip, you can always uncheck show the header here if you're looking to clean up something like this. So last thing in the data pane over here that I like to point out is if you ever are replacing the data source behind the scenes and something gets renamed, like region becomes plural, regions, and suddenly someone's not finding a buddy in the replacement data source, you can always click this replace references. So you can take your guy that didn't find a buddy on the other side when the data source got refreshed, say replace references, and point to, hey, region is now click regions, and you can swap that out. Last thing with the data pane here, if it ever disappears like this, it really freaked me out the first time it happened. And it was many, many moons ago, but I remember being new to Tableau and in the data world and seeing that little double arrow happen like that. It disappears. Don't worry, your data pane is still here. It's hiding down in the bottom left-hand corner. So if you lose it, that's where to go look for it. Let's talk about calculations real quickly as we wrap up our organized data section. So with calculations, one thing I really like to do is when I make a new calculation, for years now I've added the CALC preface, basically a little prefix that says, hey, Erin, as a reminder, you made this. Usually if there's an error, you introduced it. So just a little way to make these easy to find and a little tag that reminds me, in addition to that little equal sign, that, hey, you did actually create this. If you are new to Tableau and haven't made a bunch of calculations, you might not know that behind this tiny little arrow here are sitting all of the functions in Tableau. So you can check out their syntax, look for functions that fall under certain sort of categories. If you're working with dates, you can just look at dates. You can also always add a double slash here and add comments. Love to add comments for colleagues, clients, sure, but also for myself if it's a year before I open back up this workbook. Sometimes it's really nice to have those breadcrumbs for myself of where I've been, what things look like. The apply button, I always love to point out, in case you don't use it, apply buttons can be so helpful when you're working on a stubborn calculation and you're finding that you have to keep tweaking and keep trying to make something actually execute correctly. This can be a great way to go ahead and run the code that you've created, but not have to close out of this box over and over again. And finally, I'll point out the calculation is valid. It's very nice and it's in gray. And when it's not valid, it screams at you in red. And then it kind of goes into the background here. I want to always highlight when you make a calculation, go build some sort of visualization or some sort of spreadsheet so that you can check that you are in fact getting what you're expecting. The calculation is valid does not mean the calculation is accurate. It means that Tableau can indeed run the syntax that you created here, but it may not produce what you actually intended. Tableau can't read your mind. It's pretty literal software as computers go. So this is where you want to make sure that you're getting what you think you are. Okay, that's it for our organized data. Let's go ahead and talk about tidy workbooks. So let's go ahead and come over to a dashboard that's been built, and we'll go ahead and see here. When you go ahead and look at the bottom film strip here, or the bottom strip here, of where all of your dashboards, your worksheets, and your story points are living, there are actually 3 different ways that you can look at this. You can look at all of them at the same time with this little sheet sorter grid in the bottom right hand. This can be helpful to see them all at once. You can look at them as a film strip. You'll get this little preview of what's happening, or you can look at them just as this text. Remember, you can always right click and change the color. This can be helpful for grouping, or if you've got an error, one of my favorite things to do is to click this red button. So I'm reminded, hey, this needs work, something is broken here. You can also hide sheets. So if you look at, for example, a dashboard like this that has a lot of different things going on, if we right click here and say unhide all sheets, you'll see that all of these individual sheets are sitting behind the scenes. Then you can right click on a dashboard where they live and hide them as well. I like to try to name, to keep things organized, sheets in kind of some sort of sensical way that makes sense. There are patterns here that I like to invoke. One of the things I like to do is add just a quick description of what the chart type is, which makes things easier to find. So this is called dots, life satisfaction, just to make it easier to find. And then I've got this sort of like 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 for everything that's going to go into that dashboard one. Not necessarily necessary if you're working by yourself, but as soon as you're collaborating with other people, colleagues, clients, they really appreciate that sort of organization, understanding how the different worksheets sort of aggregate up into the broader dashboards. One other quick thing here where we talk about the menu bar, you have the option to duplicate, and you also have the option to copy and paste. Let's talk about the difference real quickly because they are different. A duplicate will take a new dashboard. It will duplicate all of your layout here. Really helpful if you're like, oh, I kind of like this, but I might want a slightly different dashboard. Duplicate it, and you can go ahead and switch, sort of play with your layout. But the underlying sheets are all still pointing to the same individual sheets. So you might have a second dashboard, but they're still pointing to these underlying worksheets. When you copy and paste, you not only create a new dashboard, you also create a whole new set of sheets for everything moving underneath. This is great if you need to have different versions of things that you've created, but maybe not what you're looking for if you're just looking to change the layout of the dashboard. All right, let's talk about just so you can see how long that gets. We can go ahead and tidy this up by right-clicking and saying hide all sheets. Everything that lives on that dashboard now is sucked back up underneath it, makes it much cleaner to look at the bottom. All right, let's create a new sheet and talk about our workspace here. So again, I got my data pane over here. All of these individual cards are movable. So you can move them around like this. You can also get rid of them if you don't use the pages for something and you need some more space, get rid of them. And then when you're all done, you can, if you ever want to reset them, click on this little sort of icon card in between the presentation and the view drop down, and you can always reset the cards, put it back the way Tableau originally had it. Couple things I love to point out here. There's always a summary. This can be really helpful if you're building something out and you're looking to double check certain counts or medians or things like that are correct. The one that I actually use quite a bit is the caption. Now the caption will attempt to give you, for example, if we bring in our number of records here, it'll attempt to give you some sort of written explanation of what's happening on the sheet. Sometimes this is helpful, sometimes it's not. What I really like to do is use it as a text box. So I can add notes for myself, hey, a reminder of the checklist of things I need to do, or notes for colleagues or clients right here in the caption that maybe helps give some context that's important to kind of couple the documentation for a workbook in with the worksheets or the dashboards itself. So love that. Remember that your summary stats are always happening down here in the bottom left-hand corner. Those can be really helpful if you're like, I should have 10,633 marks. Double check that everything came through as you're working through. And the last thing is when you do work on the marks card, if you ever have a visual, a tree map is a great example, that isn't quite coming together as expected, remember that the data pills that you brought onto your marks card do execute based on their order. So if you've got something that isn't layering quite right, see if you move the order of your data pills on your marks card around, if that helps out. Last thing here in the tidy workbook sort of realm, let's talk about exporting. So one that's really helpful, you can always right click on any mark in your visual, in your worksheets and say view data. And then you can look at the full data underneath this. The reason I love to point this out is that if you have something that you've got an outlier with 3 marks that you're like, what is happening there? Right click, view the data, and you can see the underlying records that are helpful. Also remember that you can export images. So I'm going to move my zoom bar around here. If I go to a dashboard or a worksheet, you can always come up here, go export images, worksheet, export image. Back in the day, the exports were not fantastic. As someone who has training in photography, it would drive me crazy that the quality of the export was not great. That has gotten so much better. And so an export can be a fantastic way also to tease people into actually logging into Tableau server or Tableau public and having them interact the way you hope they will with your dashboard. But we're all busy. So sometimes what I'll do with, send a client like, hey, here's your draft, but I'll go ahead and take an export of the dashboard so that they have a little teaser of what they might be excited to actually go look at. if you are brand new to Tableau, when you go to save, you might be thinking, all right, so what is the difference here between this TWBX and this TWB file? This is very important. The TWBX is a packaged workbook that takes all of the underlying data, sucks it up, and sends it along with the Tableau workbook. The Tableau workbook alone, no X, just TWB, is just going to be, I like to think of it as the pipes. It will need to be connected to another data source to work. It's like having the pipes, but no water running through them. But that can be what you need if you are sending something to someone who has access to a better data source or credentials to, SQL Server that you don't have access to or something like that. But just remember, if you're saving this TWBX, all that data is underneath it and can be viewed with Tableau Reader, which is free. So even if someone, when you send that, just remember, can this go to someone who is allowed to have all the underlying data as well? Okay, last thing in the tidy workbooks here with the export. This was something I learned about just in the last year. There's also an export as version. So if you are working, like I am for a client, in an older version here of Tableau, and you need to send something to someone who maybe is in an older version, you can export as that version and make it nice and easy for them to open up. Okay, we are halfway through. Let's see how we're doing on time. Oh, 14:40. We're right on it. So we'll keep moving. Let's go ahead and move now from our organized workbooks onto our beautiful visualization. So let's make a bump chart, mostly because I love bump charts and they're my favorite, and any excuse to make one seems to be a good thing. So with visualizations, let's talk about shortcuts to get started as we build this. Often people think that the show me button is a shortcut, and yeah, kind of. Here's what I would say. If you are really using the show me button as a crutch, I'd really encourage you to challenge yourself to go ahead and close it and see if you can replicate things on your own. It's slower at first, but in the long term, knowing what should go in each of these places on the columns and rows and the marks and the filter shelf, that will actually really speed you up. I had a piano teacher for a very long time who said the slow way is the fast way. If you'll take the time up front to learn the hands separately, when you go to put them together, they're so much easier. So slow way is the fast way there. So I would argue hiding the show me button might be controversial, but I think it's actually a shortcut. So let's go ahead and build a bump chart here. We're going to take year out. Now you'll notice year is blue, it's discrete. And when I bring it out, it goes ahead and populates year of year as blue. When I'm working with dates, or really anything that you might want to aggregate differently, you can hold down the option button, bring it out 2 columns, and it'll actually ask you, hey, up front, how do you want to aggregate this? Here, I'm going to say, actually give me a continuous timeline here. So I'm clicking on year and it's giving me that continuous. Come on, Tableau, don't. We got to keep moving. We can't have you crash now or we'll have to pause the timer. Let's try it one more time. We'll bring out our year onto columns and we'll give us our continuous year and we'll say, okay. And there we've got our timeline. So we're going from 1970 all the way to 2018. We'll go ahead and grab GDP. This is a constant 2010, so it's been controlled for inflation. We see the financial crisis right there. And we'll go ahead and break this down by our country name. So we'll get 1 per country. And right up front, we're going to see the United States, we see China, we see Japan. But as soon as we're into like ranks 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, this all down here becomes pickup sticks. So that's where a bump chart can be really helpful. If what you care about is the rank, but not necessarily the space between them, and you want to be able to discern between position 8 and 9, which is really hard to do here, this is where a bump chart comes in. So I'll change this to a rank. It's going to make spaghetti for a second, stick with me. And I'm going to change this to compute using for the country name, so 1 row per country. What I see now is actually the accumulation of the data, so not having the GDP data going all the way back to 1970 for every country. And I also, that makes sense, I know why I have my null values. So tip, when you have your null values, make sure before you right click and hide the indicator that you actually know why you have those null values. Don't just hide it and hope that everything is okay. It'll be your boss or your client that finds it every time. Here, I want to go ahead and flip this. I'm going to edit the axis, and what I want is for the first place, second place, third place to actually be at the top, not at the bottom. So I'm going to reverse that scale. And here's another little trick. We've done now quite a bit of calculations on our little GDP constant here. We've turned it into a rank and we've told it how to order. I'm going to go ahead and show the filter directly from this rows. And then I get my rank here, and now I can say, just show me the top 20 countries here. but you can just do that right off that show filter instead of having to drag the GDP constant back up to filters and doing all of the work there. So let's see. From here, you can always edit your colors. Assign palette is a quick way to change all of the colors at once. Also, if you've got some branding gurus in the house, you can always double click right on it, any of the colors, and you can change this hex code. So this can be a really nice way to hold on to, this is our company's specific red, blue, yellow. It's a great way to make friends with the public affairs folks. And let's go ahead and clean this up a little bit. Let's do some labels. So another shortcut, I'm going to hold down Command. What I'd really want is the rank written right here on the side. So I'm going to hold down Command to duplicate this pill, bring it to label. It's going to label a lot. Let's clean that up. We'll click our labels and we'll just say, show us the most recent. So it's going to give our 1 through 20 here. I'm also going to go ahead and drag in our country short name onto label. And when this starts getting a little messy, always remember you can click on the label, go to this tiny ellipses that's hiding there, and you can actually clean this up. How you want this formatted. For me personally, I'm going to go ahead and bold the rank. I'm going to go ahead and justify this. Here's another example of the apply button. I'm going to apply it there. I can see that it's working. In case I want to make any other adjustments, then I'll say okay. And the alignment, I'm going to go ahead and move my zoom bar again. On the alignment, I'm going to go ahead and bump so everything's above. This gets cleaner. I really want this just going to where the data stops. So I'm going to edit the axis here. And I'm going to go ahead and fix this from the start of our data in 1970 to the end of our data in 2018. Can also, if you don't need a label on your axis there, you just delete it and it'll go away. And from here, you can kind of clean up as desired. So one thing that I always like to say is when we draw visualizations from scratch, we usually would be there with our graph paper and our eraser and our ruler, and we would draw a lot of the scaffolding ourselves to make sure we were drawing accurate things. Then we would erase a lot of that scaffolding. When we work with digital products like Tableau, the onus then is on us to go ahead and pull back anything that we're not actually loving that they have generated in the scaffolding. So for example, we can always make the size of our marks thinner if we want. We can right click on our visualization and go to the formatting tab, all sorts of goodies in here. But the two that I like to point out, borders and lines. What's the difference? Borders are going to be anything on the outside of your visualization. Lines are going to be the things that are actually inside the visualization along with the marks. So if we go to lines here, I can get rid of that 0 line. On rows, I've still got those grid lines. I can get rid of those. I can do the same for the axis rulers. Again, I'm just kind of thinking of it as like cleaning up the scaffolding down to just the bare bones. One way to do it is erase everything and then just add back in the scaffolding that you realize, hey, I was using that was helpful, and just piece those back into place. From here, we've got everything sort of cleaned up. With our labels, let's talk about tooltips. One recommendation I always have for tooltips is to show your work. So help the audience build confidence that they are indeed understanding what you have created, and add that information to your tooltip. So here, if you're doing a calculation, like we are, for example, we're saying 1, 2, 3, 4, show people what that underlying value is that's being ranked. So I'm going to go ahead and take that GDP constant onto the tooltip, drop it there. And now when I look, someone can actually follow along. What's the work happening underneath? Oh, I get it. I see $17 gazillion is bigger than $10 gazillion. And that's why we've got rank 1, 2, 3, and so on. Another thing I recommend is when you click on a mark, Tableau by default will leave this command bar enabled. I would strongly recommend disabling it unless you have a reason to hold on to it. The reason is you can accidentally click keep only and everything will disappear. And most people interacting with Tableau who aren't used to building behind the scenes, this will spook them. And they'll be like, I broke it, I'm so sorry. They'll hand it back to you. So what I'd recommend doing instead, going into tooltips and unchecking this include command button. When you do that, then you come back, those command buttons are now gone. It's kind of like adding bumpers on a bowling lane or maybe some scaffolding on the side of a mountain road, just making sure we're keeping people in a productive, safe environment where they can actually understand the data and not get worried that they're breaking something precious that got built. The last recommendation here on visualizations and shortcuts is to go ahead and go ahead and clean up all your tooltips before you start duplicating. I'm a big fan of creating something and going, well, I kind of like that, but is there something better out there? Right clicking and then duplicating the sheet here and continuing to draft. But I'm always grateful when I've gone ahead and cleaned up the tooltips ahead of time. Here, for example, we could go ahead and turn this into a slope chart by just keeping the first and the last year. This will really make the story about China and their meteoric rise here come to the forefront. But now our tooltips are all cleaned up, which can be really nice. Okay, how are we doing? Oh, we got 5 minutes left. Gonna have to fly through our last bit here. So we're on to the last 15 tips here. These don't take quite as long. We're on to flexible dashboards. So when we build a dashboard, let's talk real quickly about determining our size up here. So as you know, you've got the fixed size, the automatic size that expands and contracts to whatever screen it's shown on. I'm a big fan of the range. So if I'm building a visualization or a dashboard that I know I'm intending to have folks look at on a desktop, but I don't know whether they're going to be on a small laptop or whether they're going to be on a big desktop screen at their desk, what I'll do is implement this range and give them, with the same proportions, something on either side. This will give a smaller version and a bigger version that will kind of expand and contract. And when that happens, the person who's our audience will feel like, oh, look, this visualization is perfectly fit for my machine. And that can really feel so much better than being like, wow, I can't read any of this because clearly this was only built for the person's machine who actually created that, which isn't ideal. Remember, the first thing I would do when I'm making a dashboard is go ahead and make the size of it, set the range, everything, and then test it wherever it's going to live long term, whether that's in Tableau server, which will add some additional scaffolding, try it on a desktop, try it on a laptop, see if it's breathing appropriately. Let's now talk about containers. So as you can see, there's a lot of containers going on here. If you work with containers all the time, you might love them, but gosh, they can be a little fickle when you're first figuring them out. We've got horizontal, going to stack side by side, or vertical containers, going to stack top to bottom. When I bring out a container, you'll know it's a container because it's got a blue line around it. I like to go ahead and bring out 2 blank objects and establish how that container is working. You can also always double click the container where you see the object has got this 4-pronged arrow, double click it and it'll take you up a level, which can be really nice. You can also always click this drop-down menu and say distribute contents evenly. This will keep things nice and set. And we can actually see that in play when we go over to our dashboard here that's been pre-built. So for example, if I double click this object, we got a text box here. Question is, where does it live? Double click and you can see that it's living in a horizontal container here. If I click this little drop down, I can see distribute contents evenly. All these little text boxes are going to be given the same amount of space. If I added a 6th one, they'd all kind of scooch over and adjust to make room. And then that trick I really think is helpful because then you can keep going. Double click, see that it's in a vertical container here. Double click that, see it's in another horizontal container. This gets a little bit sort of infinity layers going, but you can double click again and you can see where it's living in the entire sort of broader spectrum. But I think that can be really helpful. You can also, if we last but not least want to look at our layout tab over here, we can see where exactly any object on that's on our dashboard, where it's at pixel wise. So if you're someone who has any sort of art background and you're used to laying things out in a very meticulous way, I'm definitely those people, you can click on an object and you can see, okay, this object, this little container here that has our title and our little subtitle, it's at 1616, which makes sense because I know I've got 16 pixels of padding before I get to this edge. I can also see that this background is where I'm making this light gray happen. You can adjust the background for any of your layout components there. You can see the same thing is happening here with this container, changing the background there. That can be kind of a nice way to sort of create some zones that make it easier for people to go 1 zone, 2 zone, 3 zones, and now I can get into sort of the nitty gritty. But I've got some confidence that I understand how the hierarchy of the dashboard is set up. I'm a big fan of outer and inner padding. So outer padding, I remember the TC where this was announced that there was going to be outer and inner padding and cheering very loudly in excitement. So outer padding is going to push the items with white space, or if you change the background, different colors, that outer padding is what's creating this sort of card-like feel around the other items. And then the inner padding, if I click here and I see this inner padding, that's what's going to push from the edge and give the text here a little breathing room. So if we transition this inner padding to outer padding, we would get white all the way up to the side because it would be pushing on the outside. If we want to stay within this gray container and just have a little breathing room on the inside, that inner padding can be a really helpful thing. Last two tricks here. Under the item hierarchy, you will want to go check and see, as you've built your dashboard, has Tableau added, as it usually does, some extra containers? Go through when you're all done and you're happy with your dashboard and just open these up and say, yep, does this make sense? So there's my vertical container. It's containing two different text boxes. And then here's my, my dots, and then my horizontal container down here at the bottom with my 5 little text boxes. Excellent. All of this is making sense. Last tip here, you can always right click on any of these items and you can rename the dashboard item. So if you've got a lot going on and you're trying to keep things really tidy, especially for colleagues, other people, clients maybe, but maybe for yourself, when you come back to something that you've created a long time ago, there's our timer. That can be really helpful to leave yourself some notes by naming things with things that are actually easy to follow. So with that, we're at 30. I think we hit all of our 60 tips. But like I said, they're all on the website. So if I missed any, they're there. And if we hopefully added a couple extra, you can find those in the recording as well. And with that, I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen so I can see you guys again and not just a tiny green dot. So any questions that I can answer? Let's see.
Thanks so much, Erin. Olga, I don't know whether you've been keeping an eye on the chat window, but I took notes of a few questions that I can get started with. So the first one was, is there a way to comment a large section of code instead of line by line? And actually, if I followed the chat correctly, I think somebody, Josh, I think actually provided a link. So I think that question might have already been answered.
Perfect, great.
Community.
I was going to say, that's always the best answer.
Yeah. So then another really great question for you. How long have you been using Tableau? And then do you have, what's your best advice for beginners?
Yeah, absolutely. So December 2014. So however many, 6, 7, almost 8 years. Yeah. Mental math is not my strength, guys. It's I've got my TI calculator from high school always on my desk. So a while. I would say what I remember working best. So a little background about me. I was a poetry major and an analog photography minor. I was hardcore humanities, scared to death of stats and programming and anything in that world. STEM, I just sort of blew off as well, that's not for me. Got into my first job, got introduced to Tableau in 2014, and the rest is history. But one thing that I remember doing, because I was entirely self-taught, because I didn't have any of this background. I remember working through Tableau Public. And what I would do is each morning, I would go grab something I didn't know how to make. So, I've never made a scatter plot before. I've never made a bullet chart before. I would find one that was engaging. I would download it. I would deconstruct it. And then I literally would just rebuild it until I had sort of figured out how it worked. The reason that I'm a huge fan of a strategy like that is that I think it's really easy to, in our sort of professional development, and even with students too. I mean, don't get me wrong, I do boot camps for professionals and I do boot camps for students, and that stuff can be really fun, but true growth happens with sustained practice. And that is true whether you've ever tried to learn a new language or try to learn a sport or a new instrument. It doesn't happen overnight. So I'm a big fan of, again, I'll go back to the piano reference. I remember as a little kid being told 30 minutes each evening is so much better than 3 hours right before your lesson on Sunday. It's just not the same amount of practice. So with Tableau, what I found so helpful was to go ahead and take one little example each morning and block it out on your calendar. People will pop up in Teams and Slack and be like, oh, she must be available. whatever you need to do, block for 15 minutes even, and download it, deconstruct it. And then every time you do that, it just gets easier and easier. I would say that it was probably 6 months to a year before I really felt like Tableau was out of the way and I was in the data. The biggest thing that I would say with getting started is that if you don't understand how Tableau expects your data to be structured, that is the biggest hurdle. So I remember going to one of those boot camps, right? Tableau hosted 4 days of training, 2 days intermediate, or fundamentals, 2 days intermediate. I left with this entire notebook that I probably still have somewhere of every way that I was going to visualize our data for students. I was working at a university at the time, and got back to our data set, tried to hook Tableau up to it, and was immediately in tears because the data was not structured for a computer, it was structured for human eyes. Again, I didn't have that background in database design. Now I can glance at it and go, oh gosh, there's not, one field per column, and there's not, one transaction per row. But at the time it felt really inaccessible. I could see the data in Excel, but when I tried to connect Tableau to it, it didn't work. And that was enough of a roadblock that despite my organization investing all that money into an initial training, we just had to pause because the real job was sort of sweeping away. And it was 6 months before we got back to it. So that's a long time ago in my journey, but it's something that's still very vivid for me, of feeling so excited coming out of a training and then so demoralized trying to actually get started with Tableau. And it's that data structure. So those would be the two things. Practice a little bit every day. Tableau Public deconstructing is a great way to do it. And then make sure you do some research. If you don't have that SQL data, if you don't know how a relational database would expect your data to be structured, go down that rabbit hole long enough to make sure you've got your data ready for Tableau.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. I mean, yeah, I remember, I think Tableau Public is great for downloading and reverse engineering things. So it's great source of inspiration. I distinctly remember times going out there and being like, you can do that in Tableau?
And
so,
still, right?
Yeah.
All these years later, it's still my favorite way to learn because I'm always inspired by what other people are able to create.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the, not to tout the community, but I just feel like the community is so open and giving. There are certain communities you join and you're kind of like, where do I find information? How are other people doing it? Everybody's keeping it to themselves. And Tableau is just the opposite. It's oh, you want help with Tableau server performance management? Here's a workbook connected to your Postgres database, and anyway, so love that. I'm just checking the time. We've got about 25 minutes left of our meeting today, but we have plenty of time for more questions. So let's go with some more. Are there any tips? Well, there was some discussion about hiding worksheets when they're not used on a dashboard. We all have things that maybe we're actively working on that aren't part of a dashboard, or I don't know, for whatever reason, they're not part of a dashboard. You don't want to make them visible to people. What are your, how do you handle that?
Yeah, great. So to my knowledge currently, and please jump in community and correct me if I'm wrong, there isn't a good way, if it's not anchored to a dashboard, to hide it. One strategy that I've used in the past is to create a dashboard called draft or background work or please do not delete or something along that line, and anchor everything to it and then hide it there. I will often, to try to stay organized, there's always the ideal of organization and what actually happens. There's some, chasm between those two usually, but ideally, I tend to preface things. So draft or verification, or I'm trying to think, just some sort of word working, exploring, that I will use as a preface consistently throughout the workbook, put them all in one area, turn them all yellow. Yellow is the first color the eye sees, so trying to make sure they stand out and they're bright, so I understand where they're at. But I'm a big fan then of having, if you have to sort of save off a version that needs to go public or needs to be published without your work, I'm a big fan of kind of having the source of truth as your main workbook. And then if you have to save off something to go publish, fine, but keeping your work in that original sort of drafting workbook. Because gosh, you can so easily go round in circles coming back to try to resolve something that you know you solved, and yet it's still missing.
Yeah. I particularly like the idea of prefacing everything with something instead of just leaving it sheet 38
Yeah.
Just rename it. It's like the bare minimum,
Yeah.
So great tip. I like that. And then being consistent about it, I think, is also a really great.
Yeah. I think that, I don't think I've seen many tips and tricks where people talk about tidying things up and making things organized. So I appreciate that greatly. I'm definitely, I'm guilty of going to every single sheet and formatting the same summed value over and over and over. So it's kind of the same philosophy. Do a little bit more work up front and you're going to save a lot of time. I even see that as saving a workbook that has that format in it for somebody that's new to say, okay, start off with this template and build what you have. And that's kind of already built in there. So I appreciate the tidy and the organized tips greatly. And I mean, all the other ones are great, but those are the ones that I have to revisit. So, thank you.
I'm with you right there. Sometimes I also will, I'll be so excited to dive into like, the data set just arrived from the client. Let's get in there and start working. Often what I'll do is have to take the time to say, okay, I got to explore, I got to kind of see. Now go create a new workbook and have the actual like clean version. And being comfortable with like, I'm going to take 20 minutes to kind of maybe recover a little bit of ground, but really get organized. Gosh, it saves so much time in the future, but
definitely. That was awesome. I'm so glad that you have, that this is going to be recorded so everyone can take a look at it again, and that you also have the PDF out there on your website too. So very nice. Thank you. Anybody else have questions or comments or?
There were some other questions in the chat that I made note of, because if you've ever used the chat, if people are like talking, right, you lose track of it. So, so I was trying to keep them. But one question was about like a good resource for creating a template dashboard, like, something that kind of comes with a header, footer, fonts, colors, kind of already preloaded. Like, do you have an approach for that?
I'm a big fan of being as consistent as you can. So especially with organizations, it is totally worth taking the time to make basic layouts that actually can be devoid of data. They don't have to have any data in them. You can go ahead and sort of design what will work well for wherever this is going to live, if it's Tableau server or online, whatever it might be. And being a little bit particular about sort of testing out different layouts and designs, and then being as consistent as possible. I don't know any sort of shortcuts for it. I often will go to Tableau Public and look at like, oh, that's a beautiful layout. How can I build that in? But if you're in an organization, what I would say is when you build something visual and show it to someone, anything that's different is something that piques our interest to say, well, that must be important. So if the title or the layout is the same and consistent and feels familiar, then we don't have to there's no cognitive load added to be able to sort of look at the new information. And so what I would say is, like, for example, if, going to my slides, for example, if I am going along with this sort of white, black, and coral theme, and all of a sudden everything's bright blue, you're going to say like, whoa, something important has happened here. I would say one of the biggest things I see with layouts and with branding and with style guides is that if you're presenting something for an organization, each person's individual fingerprints really shouldn't be there anymore. You should work as a team with all of your brilliance to come up with some sort of branding or layout or style guide that is flexible enough to expand and contract with different use cases, but is consistent in terms of where is their metadata, are there links to, have questions, email so-and-so, where the filters are, those kind of usability things. Be as consistent as a group as possible, which is so much easier to prescribe than to actually implement. But those kind of things for the audience shouldn't hopefully feel like whiplash for them. It should feel like, I recognize this comes from this brand or this organization, and this is, you're building confidence for that audience. I know what will happen when I click here. I know where to go for my filters. And when that confidence is there, then suddenly people get out of their own head and they're actually looking at the data, which is the whole goal.
Well, plus, don't you think that, so yes, I mean, absolutely, let's focus on the data. But also I feel like I've seen dashboards where it's like, there's absolutely no branding, no formatting at all. And it, you know, and then I see one that has the branding and the formatting, and I'm like, I almost trust that one more. It's like somebody went to the effort to apply this and like really was thoughtful about it. And so there's also,
Absolutely.
it kind of gives this perception of trust. That's fantastic.
And we have that visceral reaction, right? Like I remember many years ago at a TC, Andy Cotgrave talked through like, we experience visualizations in 3 moments, 3 phases. We have the visceral knee-jerk reaction, then we have the behavioral, how do I actually interact with this? And then we have the reflective, we think back to it or we return to it physically. How does it affect our actions? But we forget about that visceral moment so much because it's over in an instant. Like the slide or the dashboard or the website, whatever it is, flashes on the screen, and we either want to like lean in or we pull away. And that moment is really where I love like aesthetic and design type stuff. That moment is what you can really capitalize on it. And I think you're totally right, Brandy. It's if the attention to detail has been applied in that moment, then we assume that that same level of detail has been applied to actually the analysis, making sure all the data is there, the important stuff.
Exactly. Well, Erin, thank you so much for taking the time to present. We have about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to turn back to the agenda. But definitely check out Data Dozen, Erin's website and company, for that cheat sheet and all sorts of fun. You have a blog, I think, too, right? So lots of great tips and tricks out there as well. Thank you so much, Erin.
Thanks, guys.
All right, so I'm going to start sharing my screen again so that we can dive back into our presentation. Okay, great. Okay, so like I said, we have about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to just briefly touch on some of the stuff in the Tableau conference. There are many fantastic resources out, you know, on Twitter. If you just Google like Tableau conference recap, you're going to find all sorts of great ones. I'm actually going to share one of my favorites in the chat. But there's all sorts of other ones out there. So I don't feel like I compete with them. They have great recaps. If you're looking for recommendations on sessions to watch, go check out that blog post. What I was particularly interested in is the opening keynote. And I say this knowing full well in our audience profile that was like your least favorite. Okay, but I'm hoping maybe I can like open your mind a little bit. So I am a Tableau server administrator. I manage the Tableau deployment at my company. And so I'm particularly interested in how I can help elevate our use of Tableau and just data in general, more broadly across the firm. And so I actually really like the opening keynote because both the CEO and you know, various, you know, evangelists, they will come in and they'll talk about how they think about Tableau, and Tableau's like almost roadmap for the future, and it gets me really excited. And so I wanted to just take the opportunity to share with you some of my thoughts, but I would love to hear from you as well, you know, specific to that opening keynote, what you thought was interesting. So again, I realize that we only have a few minutes and we want to give away some prizes, so I'm going to keep it short. These, you know, all of those sessions are available to watch out on, you know, Tableau's website. You can find the recordings of all the sessions. But so for the opening keynote, I was particularly interested in how, you know, Tableau's perspective really, it seems to me, is about filling in all the gaps that we have with data, right? Like we've got awesome data visualization tools, we've got data preparation tools, but how do we get that data closer to where people need it? How do we help companies who are looking to become more data-driven find the talent that they need, right? How do we make collaboration easier? And we start thinking about governance and lineage and, you know, all of these kind of like helpful bits of information that really make your user experience with data a lot better. And I feel like they kind of talked about it in depth in that opening keynote. And so, you know, Mark Nelson, the CEO of Tableau, talked about how data and specifically Tableau jobs are in high demand. And how we've got Tableau user groups, Tableau public, and even Tableau academic, which is where they can give like Tableau desktop licenses to students. All of those platforms are growing. Data skills are becoming a necessity, right? Like, and then he even mentioned that there's like lots of companies say that they want to be data driven, but only a handful of them actually feel like they are. So there's a big gap there. And they, he talked about the Tableau economy, which is what's up on the screen right now, which is the Tableau community, which is all of us, Tableau's partner network, so all sorts of like consulting companies that are doing, awesome work to make Tableau useful, applicable, practical, and implement all of that. And then the Tableau platform, which is, all of the Tableau products that we know. And I just thought that that was pretty fantastic, right? And they talk about the different, things that they're doing in each one of these kind of pillars, if you will. So like one thing that he also mentioned was the do no harm guide, which is really, focusing on creating an ethical data culture. We've moved beyond just creating a data culture, and we've moved into how can we, really make sure that we're being thoughtful as we apply data in our everyday lives, right? Let's make sure that we're focusing on the ethics of that. And so that do no harm guide was pretty cool. And I'm going to share the link out as well. Lots of great content, I think, coming out of this meeting, but I thought that was fantastic. And so then we, Mark turned it over to Francois, who talked about, diving a little bit more deeper into specifics, right? It's great to have a broad vision. So what are specifically things that are being done? So, Francois talks about collaborative and accessible, data. And what does that mean, right? Like, let's get that data closer to where people are doing their work, right? So getting alerts right in Slack, being able to ask questions of a data source, like natural language processing questions where you're like typing to like a colleague, if you will, right? And getting a response back, like almost like somebody even made the analogy that like data is almost going to be like a team member, right? You can ask it questions and it can contribute to the work that you do by like, sending you alerts and notifications and things. So making data really collaborative and accessible. Let's see. They then talked about business science, which is a fun new term, but it's essentially kind of, I would think more of like a more approachable AI or advanced analytics. And the goal here is, so they already have Einstein Discovery, which is like an ability to create models for use in Tableau, but they're rolling out this new thing called Model Builder. And Model Builder will help you like connect to a data source, choose a target that you're like looking to predict something, training a model using AI to actually help you select the best model, because there's lots of different modeling techniques that you can use, and then diving deeper into the results and really just making it easy, right? They're democratizing AI almost. And then also the ability to share that model for review and collaborations with other people who might have expertise in different areas. So I thought that that was pretty cool. They also have something that they're working on called scenario planning, which seemed to be about like simulating different scenarios that your business might experience. Like if you think about supply chain, right? What happens if this, if we can only ship so many products next month, like what happens to our business that way? And using data and the scenario planning to simulate what that would look like and even provide suggested solutions. And I thought that that was really cool. And when I saw that, given my background, recently graduated with a master's in predictive analytics, what I thought was really cool is it's kind of like what we would consider like linear programming, operations research. And I think that this tool just did a really great job at making that really intuitive, as well as transparent, right? You want to have insight into what's happening behind the scenes, right? Nobody likes a black box model. So I feel like they did a really great job there. And then, well, I think there's two other things that Francois kind of dove into. One was really around the trust of your data. So, you know, right now we're kind of in this like data chaos, right? We've got data everywhere. You know, we're trying to simplify and streamline where people can access that data, how they work with it, make it very seamless, right? You don't want to have to remember, oh, I go out to Tableau for this and I go over here for that. Like it should just all work together. It should be intuitive, right? And so, you know, trusting your data as we continue to grow and evolve and continue to use it, it becomes more widespread. And there's just, you know, it's expanding exponentially. How do we get our arms around that from a governance perspective? And they talked a lot about, you know, you use Tableau Prep to kind of control and streamline the flow of that data, using Prep Conductor to scale and automate these workflows. And then there's something called Data Catalog, which is part of the data management add-on, if you recall from our audience profile. And that kind of provides a complete picture of all of your data assets that live out on Tableau server, and even the data lineage behind that. So you can, so we have it. And so far I'm quite impressed. You can actually go to a data source. You can say, let's say, you know that a certain field in this data source is wrong, right? It was either calculated wrong or it came from the data vendor incorrectly. You can look at where that field is used. In all of the workbooks and all of the sheets on Tableau server, you can see where that field is used. You can even see who owns these objects, where this field is used. And right from Tableau server, you can send them an email. How brilliant is that? I just feel like I was like impressed. Anyway, and I feel like it takes a lot to impress me. So I'm a harsh critic, but I felt like that was pretty great. So they talk about lineage, defining like providing data definitions, right? I know people the chat was blowing up with metadata discussions, right? Being able to add comments to calculated fields, being able to add comments to the fields themselves, even if they're not calculated fields, that is metadata, right? It's helping people better use the data that's out there. And so when you have data definitions, right, now you have to manually add them to every field in Tableau. Who wants to do that? Raise your hands if you want to do that, right? Like nobody wants to do that, okay? But maybe you have a data glossary somewhere in your firm, maybe in some other tool like Elation or Calibra or something. Tableau is working on leveraging that external metadata from another tool and being able to suck that in and bring it into Tableau. So now you only have to maintain your data definitions in one place, but they kind of permeate all of your Tableau data sources. I'm in love with this idea. As well as virtual connections to data sources. So this is something, another thing I'm just super excited about. You can tell how much of a Tableau administrator I am with how much I'm nerding out about these like things that most people have no visibility into. But anyway, virtual connections to data allows an administrator to kind of set up all of these connections to all of these different data sources for you. And then you can kind of, as a user, you can leverage them. You've been granted access via some sort of like data policy, centralized row level security is kind of baked into this process. So I'm super excited about that. But anyway, we're almost at time. So I just wanted to share all of that information because I thought there's all of these cool little things that are going to make it just more intuitive and easier to use Tableau. So this was the kind of the last one I was just talking about here. So those were some of the things that I was most excited about when I was listening to the opening keynote. Hopefully you're excited about some of that. And maybe you'll check out that opening keynote because it is a good one. But I've been talking, it's been quite the monologue. So I appreciate you sticking with me. Let's get to the fun stuff. The giveaway. So we are giving away $50 gift certificates to 3 lucky people who, asked questions or not really ask questions. Anybody who is like chatting in the chat window, who have been contributing, answering questions, posting stuff, anybody who like contributed to this like awesome conversation that we've had in the chat, you have been entered to win. And I have already selected the winners. I did this. Erin was answering all your wonderful questions. So the winners are Jen Babos. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right, I apologize. Ray Gibler, and John Mitchell. You three have won. Congratulations. I will be emailing you with your gift. So congratulations. Thank you for attending and contributing and making great comments and asking fantastic questions. It was truly wonderful. Thank you. Okay. I think the last thing I just wanted to share, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Olga, is the data book club. I know a few of you guys in the audience profile had asked about, or said, reading a data book is going to be on your list of professional goals. I started a data book club, and we're just about to start the winter session. And it sounds like this is going to be a fun one. I believe this is not for sure yet, because I'm giving people a few more days to vote, but it looks like we're going to be reading Storytelling with Data, Let's Practice, which is going to involve both reading the book as well as like giving you like motivation to do the hands-on examples. So in the chat, I've put the link to the data book club where you can sign up, and then you'll get all the emails about the details of that once the book club starts. Okay, so that's my spiel and my kind of overview of Tableau conference and the giveaway. Back to you, Olga.
Okay, thank you. I just looked into the storytelling with data. I like that one. So thank you all for meeting with us today. We will be meeting to set next year's times, meetings, agendas. So take this opportunity to get in touch with us, to give us ideas of what you want to see. Also, if you want to present, this is a really awesome, friendly, loving group to present. If this is your first time, we welcome it. And you can check out the events that we have, searching for MKE Tug. We have a really great LinkedIn group. Email us. And thanks again, Erin. Thank you so much, and hope to see you all next year.
Thank you, Erin.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody.